let's talk about change management. And we did the intros this morning, and a number of you talked about either that's your role or the importance of it. And I couldn't agree with you more. So over the next half hour, 40 minutes or so, we'll talk about change management. We'll talk about the basics. Let's make sure we're all aligned on what we're really talking about when we talk about change management, because it can mean different things to different people. But I wanted to be more helpful to you and really talk about it, how we do it for teams, and what change management looks like around this particular application. And then I thought I'd give you a nugget at the end around COVID-19, what we're seeing with teams, what we've done, and things as you implement this in a work environment that's very different than it was 4 months ago. What particulars do you need to take advantage of there? So that's where I'm headed. And then again, if you want to go off script, we're always happy to do that as well. So let's talk about the basics for a few minutes. What if you built it to steal from Field of Dreams and they didn't come? We tend to take the whole Field of Dreams mentality that because we put something out there, everybody's going to come and they're going to use it. But the reality is, while it's great for a movie and it's great for ghosts showing up in an Iowa cornfield, it doesn't work that well with technology implementations, particularly with Microsoft Teams. Why? Right? I mean, it's there, it's out there for people to use. The reality is it's not because we don't get the technology right. We usually do. We usually miss on the adoption piece. We miss on the stakeholder engagement piece. We miss getting the buy-in. The stat I'm quoting here, I'm referencing ProSci, which if you follow any change management circles or are involved in them, is one of the thought leadership bodies within the change space, kind of like the Six Sigma, if you will. What Six Sigma is to process improvement and lean. ProSci is to change management, and this is their stat most recently done in 2016. Although I say that, they probably did it in part of the 2019 study as well. I first saw it in 2008. IBM Global Services did it, and I just was on the phone with another company. I saw two of their presentations, and they had this in two different presentations. They had this stat out there for two different sources, right? And so it's out there a million times. And so it talks about the nature of this problem and how important it is. So when we're talking about change management then, and this is kind of my passion for business, is helping to solve this problem, is how do we get people ready, willing, and able to be successful? We know that project success is going to be dependent on two things. One, we got to get the technology right. And the beauty of Microsoft Teams, the beauty of my Perficient teammates is they're really good at what they do, putting it in, but Microsoft has made Teams pretty easy to install. And then we got to put the governance in place. We got to put the security and all that kind of stuff. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's the easy part. The hard part, and the second piece that project success depends upon, is getting users actively engaged. We also know that about 70% of our ROI is dependent on people actually behaving the way we want, 70 to 80% even. So there's value in putting teams in place, maybe cost savings. There's it's a more integrated platform than some other point solutions that are out there. There's value there by having the technology there. Not disputing that at all. But the real value is people using it. That's why this thing is so important. We know that anytime something is new, there's going to be disruption. There just is. I've done this 25 years. I've been in the IT space for that time. Been around a ton of project installs. I know the audience out there, I know you guys have done that as well. And I would challenge any of us, and if you would say, no, you have an exception to this, then kudos to you, because that's awesome. But the reality is there always is disruption. Change is hard. When I leave on Friday afternoon at 5 p.m. and I log out of the old system for the last time, even though it's old, it's antiquated, it's not efficient, whatever it may be, I know it. And when I show up Monday morning with the new system in my poor example here, even though it's more efficient, it's better, it's faster, it's more collaborative, all those things, I've still got to train myself to work differently, even with a great change management program, right? And so our goal is how quickly can we get back, I call it above the productivity line. That's what we're after, right? The ROI, positive ROI. We're going to dip below it in the short term. How much can we minimize that? That's directly correlated to how well we do change management. So with that level set, let's talk a little bit around, okay, how do you do change management? And we have a methodology at Perficient that we use, which I've got on the screen. And believe me, I'm not going to go deep into it. The last thing you want is change management methodology overview. But I do want to hit the highlights to give you a flavor of how we do things, which is going to set the stage for the conversation. Okay, well, how do we take this and apply it to teams? I also want to be very clear that this isn't the only way to do it. This isn't the only methodology that's out there. I've talked about ProSci. If you know ProSci, and by the way, if you've implemented teams and you're working closely with Microsoft and ProSci are deeply aligned. So you may have experienced some of ProSci. The method they use is called ADKAR. There are other methodologies that are out there. At the end of the day, these methodologies are all pretty similar. This happens to be the Perficient one. But how do we do it? There's a couple of key points. First of all, having methodology is critical. Change management, effective change management is not fly by the seat of your pants and let's hope we can get it done. It starts early. It takes time for users to buy in to get there. The second thing I'd want you to know is it's very iterative, and that's what those white arrows in the center of the methodology indicate. Change management is not a waterfall methodology that we do each of our things once and we're done. We're dealing with projects. Projects are dynamic. We're dealing with people. People are super dynamic. People change dispositions throughout the course of the project. The people themselves change over the course of the projects. People leave, they go to other jobs, they go to other roles, they go to other companies. We have new people come in. We have to stay on top of that. So we go through our methodology, we iterate it throughout. But then finally, and maybe most importantly, the most important point I'd want to make on this as we talk about this, and for teams is particularly important, is we have to start somewhere in a circular methodology, and we always start in the define phase, which is why it has the number 1 behind it. We're in the define phase, we are setting the tone. We are defining why. Why are we doing it? Now, sometimes that's overused, right? I think that, or it may be said differently. It's very well grasped, starting with the why. Many of you probably watched Simon Sinek's Start with Why. We were talking about Peloton earlier, right? And I was on a class this morning. Chris, you'll appreciate this if you're still on. And Matt Wilpers was leading it. And he was talking about when we join a class, whatever we do, we ought to be asking, why are we there? What's the purpose? And how closely that ties to change management, right? Why are we implementing teams? And what I want to do there is talk even more than why we're implementing teams. I want to take it down to the user level in terms of what's in it for me. That is going to drive buy-in. That's going to drive alignment. And that's going to get people excited and pulling information from us from a change management perspective versus us just pushing it on them and hoping it's landing. Because now if they're invested and they're engaged, they're excited, they're going to want this before we probably can get it to them. And that's super cool. So we're going to start there, and we're going to start there when we talk about teams, how we go about this. Quickly to wrap up, when people talk about change management and what do you do, what do you create, I like to share this slide just to give you an idea of our deliverables. People go, yeah, okay, now I get it. We always have a change plan. Okay, that's obvious. The case for change, that's the why. Why are we doing this? Stakeholder analysis. We want to understand who the stakeholders are. And a lot of times for teams, it's a pretty broad group, right? Because a lot of times it's organization-wide. But we want to understand who they are. We want to understand the level of impact that the implementation is going to have on them, whatever it may be. We want to understand their disposition, both today and what we want it to be when we turn this thing on. A lot of people can be very supportive and very positive, but you'd be surprised. Not everybody is. And you may even have some resistance out there. And then if we have resistance, we want to understand why we have resistance, because from that, we can build it. We can build a robust and a solid communication plan, or even a training plan that addresses those things. A readiness assessment, just like we check the readiness of technology, we want to check the readiness of users. We do this iteratively through the course of the project, just like the stakeholder assessment. When we do the readiness assessment, we want to first start with what is people's willingness to change, and then as we go through, how ready are they to change? Communication plan, communication artifacts, very standard. If I asked you what change management was, you would probably say communications and training, so that falls right into that. Training plan, training artifacts. We're going to talk about training and how we do that for teams here in a little bit as well. And then finally, Change Champion Network. We've found that these are extremely important. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on change networks today, but if you've heard of them, then you know it is basically getting arms and legs, non-project people who are out in the field to help be a two-way communication channel They also can provide an unparalleled level of user support, protecting your help desk, but protecting them when you go live. And we often build those. Would love to talk more about those if you ever want to, as well. Okay, so with that foundation on what change management is, I want to move into what does it look like for teams? How do we apply that at a high level? And I recognize that was at 50,000 feet, but we'll get more tactical here. Any questions though before I move into that? You want to stop me and we talk about what change management is or kind of how we do it? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move in. So Ron talked about this earlier. When we talk about teams specifically in the value maturity model, and you frankly can apply this to probably about any technology you do, but we're going to talk about teams here specifically. Deploying and activating is something that largely happens on the IT side, right? And there is value in that happening, back to having the technology out there. But the real value is on the right side of this. When you see the bars kind of get above the value ROI baseline, the awareness, enablement, and proficiency blocks, the silver, the gold, and the black blocks, and that's where change management comes in. We're not going to try to get people proficient on day one, but we want to get them aware and we want to get them enabled, and then over time they're going to build on that to get to proficiency, and that's where we see the real value. That's where collaboration happens in spades across your organization. That's where you really get the benefit of M365, because remember, Teams is something that really ties everything else together, right? And the integration there is the real value, and it separates teams from point solutions. So that's where we're going to head on change management. That's where we're going to get that ROI we were talking about. Okay, so how do we do it? Again, we crawl, walk, run. You've heard that, it's overused. We get started, we experiment, and then we scale it, right? Because what's really important to understand is every culture is different. People at each organization, while people categorically, you say there are people everywhere, they must all be the same. The reality is they all work differently. And so being able to apply best practices and then tweak them from one client to the next, in our case, or for you, for what makes sense at your company, is really, really important. Okay, so step one, getting started. And you're going to recognize a lot of these aspects from some of the things I just talked about in terms of deliverables and the different aspects of the phases. So in step one, as we get going, there's obviously the technology part and there's the people part. And so what I've attempted to highlight on this screen, which has got the whole thing, this is the whole world, the green, solid green boxes are where change management really takes the lead, and we own these things. The dotted boxes, the dashed boxes, is that the best way to say that? Is where we're really partnering with the technology team. And then the ones without any boxes around them at all are really technology-driven solutions. And so Trevor and Eric will be able to address those things, or Ron and Joel as well, as we get into those aspects. But in the first phase, in the first step, top left, very strategically put there, is the case for change. We always start there. The why, what's in it for me, how do I get people excited? That stakeholder assessment, stakeholder analysis, by the way, I use the word analysis and assessment interchangeably. So if I say that, if I go back and forth, don't get confused. But that stakeholder analysis, understanding the landscape of the people who we're going to be talking about or rolling out. And that actually works with the migration plan, because it may impact who gets it when if we don't go big bang, right? The readiness assessment, building out the change champion network are all really, really important. Equally important, you see down the bottom, the governance plan. And I'm going to talk about that probably more in a little bit. But having that set early is critical. I mentioned when I did my introduction this morning that we're just wrapping up this week, as a matter of fact, that large Southern California utility with 17,000 users, 3 different entities really that make that up. And I was talking to the team just yesterday about, what are some new learnings as we roll out teams? Because I mentioned we're learning a lot all the time. And one of my colleagues said, David, one of the things we really struggled with this on the project was we didn't have governance, or the client didn't have governance set early on. And so they were working through the governance as we were rolling out teams. And the impact was, as we rolled this out, we kept having to change what users could do, because legal and other groups would change the governance, and they would ultimately take away some functionality, put some limits on functionality. Well, That became hard because we had to change our communications and training, but then it also, in some cases, it felt like a loss, functionality being taken away from users that had already been deployed, and then it was taken away from them. So that governance piece, which is both a combination of technical and change, really getting that straight at the outset is really, really important for a good overall user experience. The pilot plan, something you'll create early. We do recommend rolling this out in small groups to kind of test it out because each company is different. What works at your company may be different than others. By the way, we don't recommend starting with your executive level, your C-suite. We've seen that happen. Not recommended for reasons that you wouldn't have to think long and hard about. And then defining adoption metrics and reporting. And Ed Sinez is going to talk shortly after I wrap up around tyGraph and that product. And I couldn't be a bigger fan of what that is, because to know you have success means measuring success. And so we want that affirmation that we've got it, but we also want to understand when we don't have it, where we don't have it, and what we need to do. And so having metrics and having a tool to look at to pinpoint where those problems is really key. So that's step one. That's how we get going. Step two is really where the work happens for us, where we're going to design and launch communications. And we're going to talk about what a good communication structure might look like here in a second. We're going to design training. We'll talk about that. You'll see team owner training and introductory classes. When we do teams, you have team owners, right? And we want to give them usually a little bit different level of training, because they're going to be your subject matter experts. They're going to be the people who really help administer the system for their groups. And so making sure we have a good plan for them, that they have a great experience, is critical. Launching the communication, establishing feedback channels. How do we know how things are going? How do we provide the level of support, the level of customer service, if you will? We really ramp that up in the experiment phase, seeing what works, tweaking it over the pilots, so that when we roll out for the mass rollout, as we scale and support it, the big bang, we have a pretty good idea that it's going to be successful. Not that we won't make any subtle changes here, but by the time we get to this point, we're pretty in tune with what's going to happen. A couple of things I'll highlight here. We do recommend launch day events to make things exciting, and a lot of times we can work with Microsoft to get some swag and get fun things out there. We want to provide white glove service, if you will, for our executives, their admins, and other key users who really have to have a good experience. Not that everybody shouldn't have a good experience, but if we know who those people are that have a bad experience, if it goes poorly for them, it's gonna go poorly for everyone. So we want to make sure we do that well, and it takes a little extra manpower. Let me be real. It means showing up on day one and making sure that those people know how to navigate. They have what they need. It means providing a hotline, if you will. Maybe it's a cell phone number where they can get support if they have any questions. But that white glove piece is critically important. Any questions about that? And I'm gonna get into some more tactics here and peeling the onion a little bit further. Okay, so when it comes to teams, so I showed you those boxes at a high level. We talked about communications. I want to talk through communications a little bit. I want to talk through the learning support sites, learning pathways. Some of you may have heard of that. Many of you haven't, and we'll explain that to you. Some of the training that we do, how we use teams to implement teams, office hours, and the gamification. Real quick on office hours, I don't have a slide on that, but let me hit that one real quick. One of the tactics we've found as we implement teams, as we go live, is we set up what we call office hours. Think back to your college, where we'll set 2 hours a day or 1 hour a day where we'll open a bridge line, or if we're on site and we're not dealing with COVID-19, we'll have a conference room or whatever it is, where people can come in or call us if it's a bridge line and just ask questions. It's an open forum. We're there to support. They can have their laptop with them, have it open, or their computer, and we can walk through issues. But I just want to highlight that it's what you think it is. I don't want to overcomplicate it. It's hey, we're there for your support. But we found that to be a hugely successful tactic that is it's a very efficient and productive time. It's also very well received by end users. But since I didn't have a slide on that, I want to talk about that. Communications. Okay, any change management effort, communications plays a huge role in that. And we like to say with change management, communication or change management isn't communicate on Monday, train on Tuesday, go live on Wednesday. We need people, we need to give people time to get used to a new solution, to be able to ask questions, to think about it. And so what we have, and this is a standard format we use in a lot of our clients, but by the way, we tweak this too, is 30 days out, we will announce, hey, this is coming. So let's say we're transitioning from Skype to Teams. Hey, we're going to discontinue Skype and we're going to be moving to Teams. Start getting your head around it. But oh, by the way, back to that case for change. Here's why Teams is awesome, and here's what's in it for you, and here's why you can get really excited about it. Same thing as if we're going. I heard some of you talk about on the intros, you're going from WebEx Teams to Teams, Microsoft Teams. Same idea. Hey, we're going to decommission WebEx Teams. We're going to be using Microsoft Teams. Here's what's awesome. But we want to give people a chance to start getting their head around it. As we move down, T-21, by the way, T is implementation day. T-14, T-7, T-1, day of. T+1, the day after, is also a very important communication. We get more tactical. What do you have to do? A lot of times, and as we rolled out Perficient, we did not migrate any data. And so it was up to us, the team owners and the team participants, the team members, to bring over data, artifacts, whatever it may be, and put it into Teams. Some places, depends on how you do it, you may actually migrate or have IT migrate that data for the users. So you need to prepare them what's coming. Do they have data cleanup they have to do in advance of that? How do they know what to do? So those are all the kinds of things we do in communications. Some of it's training, right? But some of those are key points we hit. Frequent, transparent, concise communications are really, really important, so people know what's happening, when it's happening, and what does it mean to them. All right, talk about training, because everybody talks about teams and training. Sometimes this is all we focus on, and I would discourage you from doing that. But training is an important part of Microsoft Teams because it's a new platform for a lot of us as we get into it. There's a couple of ways we do training at Perficient when we're working with our customers, and there's some things for you to consider. First of all, instructor-led training. Everybody loves instructor-led training. There's a number of different ways to do it, and there's pros and cons, right? The pros are, especially if you have a smaller class, it can be very interactive. You can really tailor it to your audience. It can be done virtually. There's a lot of different ways you could do it. Now, one of the catches to that is it can be expensive. It can be, if you've got 17,000 users or even 100,000 users, how do you do that for that many people? You probably can't. So we'll do train the trainer. We'll do it for our team owners, our site owners. We may do it for our white glove owners, where we'll do an appropriate amount of in-person training to make sure that key messages are relayed and we train the right people. But then we leverage online training an awful lot. I'm going to talk about learning pathways here in a minute. And then you've got things like Brainstorm, clip training, and some other things, some other tools that you can use for on-demand training. The one thing I will tell you, though, that's really, really important, and it probably falls more into the instructor-led training than some of these others, is it is important to have some level of customization for your business. Because what you'll find from a lot of the online avenues, which are great, and there's a place for them, and I'm a proponent of them, it's not customized. And so what that means for your users as they move from WebEx Teams or from Skype, if they translate in, it's not going to be specific to your company, and there are probably some nuances, maybe in the governance space or the security space, that you want to make sure that you build in. You can handle that through communications. You can handle that through some of your instructor-led training where you can customize that content. So let's talk about Learning Pathways. Learning Pathways is a Microsoft tool that's awesome. It comes with your license, and so there's a ton of content out there, from cheat sheets, job aids, short videos, whatever it may be, that's very specific, obviously, to what we're trying to do here. And what you can do, and where a consultant can help you, or you can do it on your own, is create what we call a learning path, which is taking all this content and creating a playlist, for lack of a better term, of that content that's really relevant to your users, so you really focus them on the right things. Again, the huge benefit to this is it's included. You're not paying extra for it. There's no subscription for it. Microsoft continues to build out content for this. It's evolving. It keeps up with the latest and greatest versions as the web content evolves. Then you've got things like Brainstorm and clip training. And I've got Brainstorm pulled up here. I'm a huge fan of this content. Like Learning Pathways, it's on demand. So users can get to it when they need to, when they want to, right? So unlike an instructor-led training class where you have to go to the 10 a.m. class, you can pull this up as needed. What Brainstorm has, what Clip Training has, is a suite of 2,500 maybe videos that are available, that are vignettes, 2 to 4 minutes on certain subjects or very finite subjects. So I'm not having to watch a 45-minute video to get one thing I need. They're well labeled. They're very well put together, very professionally done. And these are subscription-based services, so there's an added cost to do it, and it can be anywhere from $2 a user a year to $10, depends on the package, and that's a conversation we don't need to go into today. There are discounts through partners like Perficient to get that. But I love this, particularly after an implementation, because back to that stair-step graph I shared a few minutes ago, we can't get people 100% proficient in knowing everything about the tool at go live. People have a capacity to absorb information that's finite, unfortunately, right? And so we can only absorb so much, but we can learn more over time. These videos are a great way to augment your knowledge of how to use the tool, building on what you learned yesterday or the day before or last week, as you continue to use the tool more and more. So these are great things to have ongoing for 3, 6, 9 months after go live, and you're continuing to use more and more of the tool. By just a statistic, if we were in the room together and I could see you, I would share this with you. The average user uses about 15% of the Microsoft functionality for any given tool. And I say if we're in the room, I'd do a kind of a quiz or a poll with you. The super user uses 20 to 25%. What that tells you is there is a ton of functionality that's already in the system that users can use that they just don't take advantage of because they don't know how. These kind of tools really help you capitalize on that and helps you capitalize on your investment. I think they pay for themselves pretty quickly. Secondly, or thirdly, I guess, communications training. Use Teams to increase Teams adoption. Now, yes, if people are using Teams to learn, whether you put your training into Teams or you use it to chat or you use it as a communication pathway, yes, you drive your consumption numbers up, and that's all great. But more importantly, people are just in it and using it and feeling it. I mentioned a few minutes ago, I talked to some of my team that was doing that Southern California utility, and I said, "What'd you learn?" This was one thing they came back with. Said, "David, this is one of the biggest things that people are doing. We're really using this, and this is really helping our adoption because people are getting in, they're playing around. Yeah, they start out pretty elementary, but over the course of the engagement, even while we're there, the level of usage and their ability and their capabilities and proficiency with this just goes up because we're using this to communicate. We're using this to drive people to training. And so create team sites around the implementation. Create sites for your super users or your team site owners so they can get into it. And then finally, gamification. Make it fun, right? Now, there's some pretty fancy gamification tools out there, and I'm not going to talk about those, but if you want to Google that, you can find that very quickly. We can help you implement it if you want. But more importantly, know that those things are there with badges and cool prizes and things like that. But you can make your own pretty easily. And this is an example for something we made for a client where we had different levels, and then awards went with those levels, to the point where I think they gave away a Surface, which was pretty cool. But by meeting certain things, by checking off certain boxes that they created with the engagement of teams, then they, the users got awards, and that was a really cool thing. All right, this is my final topic, and then I will open it up for questions for anything you want to talk about. So we're in the midst of COVID-19, right? And one of the things we've seen around COVID-19 is the need to accelerate, or have, which in many cases accelerating awesome collaboration tools, right? Like Teams, because we're all remote. We're having to work in ways that we never planned on working. We didn't have months to prepare for it like most projects. We were kind of thrown into it, and we had to react quickly. So what does it mean for teams? First of all, understanding the challenges, right? So we're working from home. we need a tool. We need a tool that ideally has video, right? We need a tool that can help us work as if we never left the office. We also have to understand our situations where we have all kinds of distractions at home and whatnot. So understanding what the challenge is, understanding what we're trying to create is critical. Secondly, I mentioned video. I could not be more of a proponent for a video first approach at this point, which obviously Teams has that capability. I was talking with somebody yesterday or the day before about video. We're all pretty accustomed to using video now. And some of us were using it before COVID-19, but I really think that COVID-19 got us all more comfortable with that, right? And so having that video first approach brings us together, and Teams gives us that in ways that if we are going to be remote, at least gives us some semblance of being together. Thirdly, and this is my plug for Teams. Now, granted, our change management practice is Perficient, spans all of Perficient. We implement Salesforce, we implement Oracle solutions. I was on a call just a little bit ago with another partner. But let me put my plug in for Microsoft Teams right now. The beauty of Teams is that it integrates with the rest of the M365 suite in ways that other tools cannot. So it's not to disparage Zoom or WebEx. I mean, they're all great in terms of doing what they do, but Teams integrates in ways that for your users and your collaboration in ways that I haven't seen anything else work. And getting people to understand how these things work together is critical, and that's where change management comes in. You want to bolster your change champions, your early adopters, and your subject matter experts. We need each other right now. There are some people who are going to grasp these concepts easier than others, and they can help. Laggard isn't the right word, but the people who are slower to adopt, who aren't as comfortable, those people are going to help them more than you can, more than your help desk can. And so those change champions are critical. I talked about metrics to drive your campaigns, measure effectiveness, particularly important, especially when we're remote. Metrics aren't remote. It doesn't matter where we are. They can help show us where we've got great adoption, and they can help show us where we're lacking in as well. So what Ed's going to talk about here in a couple of minutes about tyGraph and show you some pretty cool stuff is really critical right now, especially when we want to pinpoint areas to improve. And then finally, complementing your company culture. Wow, say that several times real fast. Can't say it once. As you bring your company culture to bedrooms and home offices and wherever else around using technology like this, how can you recreate it? What are those ways of working that you can use Teams, ways of working in I'm going to call it the old world 4 months ago, that you want to bring to this remote workforce, right? Maybe you bring it in as you start to ease back into the office, or maybe many of you never go back to the office. How do you bring your company culture to life through Teams? So understanding what those culture values are, and by the way, people are leveraging this opportunity to make some changes to what they want the company culture to be. You don't change company culture by flipping a switch. You change individual actions that ultimately resolve in a new culture or a changed culture. But what do you want those things to be? And then to ask yourself the question, how do you use Teams to enable that or to be a factor in that? Because it can be a big deal. So this is a time that we're seeing people do that amidst COVID-19, and Teams can play a significant role in that. Okay, that was a lot. I much prefer being a change management extrovert to be in a room with y'all, and I can see you all as I'm talking and read in the room. I can't read the room at all right now, so hopefully you're still listening and you're playing along. So let me stop for a few minutes. I'm going to take a breath. What questions do you have? Where would you like to explore based on what you just heard?
Hey, David, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, so when you're going from like the technical pieces that my practice offers versus some of the change management stuff, which really gets into, you talk about ready, willing, and able, and some of those more, people-focused things. What are some of the biggest gaps that you have to overcome, or some of the, challenges that you kind of don't see when at face value?
Yeah, so great question, Ron. I mean, first thing is helping people understand, the why and why you're doing it, why we're changing. The other thing, though, is to understand that people aren't all the same. And so therefore, a one-size communication, or maybe more importantly, training approach isn't going to be the best answer for you. If we assumed it was the same and we offered the same training for everybody, it would work for a lot of people, but we would miss the mark an awful lot. So you think about those power users. You think about the people who are just going to be, I'm calling it a normal user. Making sure your strategy on communications and training is geared to them. You know, what we did at that utility I was talking about, we did several things, right? We had a multi-tiered training approach, started off with those power users, more in depth, more technical than maybe the normal user. So we segmented it that way, and then we gave it to them in bite-sized pieces. So we had training, the base training, and then we built on that over the course of several weeks, where we got more complex into more nuanced pieces of functionality. The other thing I didn't mention, Ron, is a good question. That reminds me, when we do training for teams, one of the things we do that's different from other types of technology implementations is we actually do training after we go live. We don't do it before. Now, we're going to get people ready through our communications, and we might do a broad webinar beforehand to give people an idea what the look and feel is to orient them to that. But a lot of that training happens after go live, because then they've used it and they've gotten familiar, but then they can bring their laptops or with them to training, or play along at home on their desktop and participate with us. So we're not teaching them and asking them just to try to remember something, but they actually get to do it with us. And we found that particularly important for teams.
No, that's awesome. Thanks, man.
Yeah, good question. Other questions?
Howdy, this is Jose from Cedric.
Jose.
Hey, in your past change management campaigns, have you noticed a difference in user adoption, whether you have the option to enable self-service like team creation, or if you have a more restrictive policy where you limit, teams creation to a select scope of individuals?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer for that. Certainly, and Ron, you might be able to speak to that on the more technical side. Obviously, the more you lock it down, the easier it's going to be to stay within your governance plans, and you stay within those lanes. At the same time, if you've got the right governance in place, one of the beauty for teams is it becomes pretty self-service in a lot of ways. I think sometimes it's going to come back to your company culture too, in terms of how much freedom do you generally give your employees, and/or how much do you want to give them. But in terms of adoption, I'm not sure if I would see a difference in adoption. It's just a matter of, from an adoption and a campaign perspective, making sure that we clearly communicate what you can and can't do and what the processes are going to be.
Exactly, David, because a lot of times people are going to look to the internet and other resources for information on the platform. And it's similar to buying a car, right? By the time that you've decided on the car that you want to go for a test drive, you may have 3 different choices, but you're probably ultimately way more educated on those choices than maybe even the salesperson you're dealing with. So it's important to communicate what you can and cannot do, what the roadmap to that functionality is, not to like a detailed level, but just providing a roadmap for when you're going to offer some of these features that are in targeted release or upcoming that they may have just seen on a blog or something. And having that visibility and transparency really helps.
And let me jump in related to the self-service question as well, where you say, hey, do I really want everyone creating one? I think the answer actually is no. Everybody doesn't need to be creating a team. It should be your team leaders or your project managers and that kind of thing. So from a self-service perspective, it's a great kind of carrot and stick kind of opportunity where you can say, hey, team managers, go through this training on teams and we'll give you a team. And then for your project managers who may need more teams, or people who you feel like are champions who are empowered to create teams, you absolutely can create kind of a security group. Obviously, there's some licensing questions around that, but essentially being able to give people the ability to be able to create their own teams. I would recommend that you don't start with it kind of being the Wild West where anybody can create one, but instead start with kind of prescriptive approach of, if you are a team, we can give you a team. So you kind of front end it with a survey where where you can either approve it, like a approval workflow kind of experience, but essentially I'm now, even though back in the day in the SharePoint world I was a big fan of, hey, just let's let anybody create one, but let's make sure that they're trained. With teams, I think that there's so much that gets provisioned. I'm a little bit more gated, a little bit more guarded on not having it be the Wild West of just too many teams. It's a common problem for there being too many teams, and it just creates confusion.
Yeah, definitely, Joe. The Wild Wild West is not what you want. You want to have a controlled atmosphere, however you can control it, right? You don't want a police state. That's not what you want, because then people work around you and they go around IT to get what they want done. They go to consumer tools and other stuff that gets in your way and just violates your governance policies. But if you can set the right amount of rigidness to the process, instead of using, you can disable the ability to create teams for everyone, but then, like Joel just said, put a form on top with a little bit of education as well, where people can realize, maybe I need a team, maybe I just need a SharePoint site, maybe I just need something else. And you can drive the right behaviors that way by satisfying the particular use cases that they're seeing, and also providing visibility into, like, hey, these 4 other things already exist. Are you sure it doesn't fit into one of those buckets?
This is Pamela with Cedric. I'm Jose's manager, actually. And that is where we're struggling, is on that tightrope of allowing them creativity with the culture that we have in our corporation, and ensuring that IT security, compliance, and governance is satisfied with the restrictions that we placed upon the product. It seems as if they allow the wild west. Microsoft is like, fostering that environment when they're setting their basic parameters, and we're struggling to, I don't want to say struggling, but utilizing the different management tools and incorporating them and making them work with one another to ensure that we're allowing the creativity and collaboration, but not stepping over that line.
Yeah, one of the most important things we've had to do is, like, when people start yanking out things that, like, functionality that they want, because you're right, it's a sprawl-based model that proliferates, site collections and a bunch of other things under the container of teams. And so there's a balance there. I often compare it to bumper bowling. You have this image of, like, if I sent my 5-year-old or 6-year-old to the bowling alley, the bumpers have to be up. And I think that's the constant of this, is that security and compliance, DLP, and even soft controls like processes and whatnot have to ensure that, but not get in the way of the user, so that your user can still roll that ball down the alley without anything getting in their way, or rolling a gutter ball out of the way, out front, because otherwise they'll have a negative experience and it'll be a problem. And you're right, it's a total tightrope that speaks to culture and some other things that you have to find the right balance to. And there's no, like, best practice handbook that hits it 100% of the time. There's always a variation.
Yeah, and I would just jump here and say that there is a lot of company culture aspects to this, but you do want to start with education, and even that idea of, you want to make it seem like anybody who wants one can have one, but at the same time you want a little bit of qualification as to, does it fit in a structure of, does it overlap with something else? And it's like, if IT becomes the gatekeeper for teams, how far are they going to get behind? If you can say you've got a 24-hour SLA, then it's not a big deal for IT to be able to say, is this something we want to approve? And it can be as simple as, it's front-ended by an approval workflow. The ability to create a team could be fronted by Flow, where there's a form on the front end of it. So you've just got somebody who's just reviewing those and just clicking accept, and then pushing back where it doesn't make sense.
Right.
But absolutely, I'm a big fan of, anybody who's going to be owning a team, managing a team, should really at least have participated in some kind of lunch and learn or watch the video that says, here's how to be a good citizen as it relates to teams. And there are actually some built-in mechanisms. They're just not in the Teams admin UI. It's actually a bit ironic that they're actually in Azure AD, where you can control lifecycle management, provisioning controls around having a group do it. So it's a premium feature to be able to do all those lifecycle management features, and they're not turned on by default.
Right,
So
and that's
they
where
do
we
exist.
are,
Yeah.
those management tools, because there are so many available, is trying to ensure that they don't, one doesn't cancel out the other.
Yeah.
I think that's what, you know, people need to be very cognizant of, is that ensuring that, you know, they're utilizing the top echelon to control it.
Yeah, you
And being
definitely
that
look at the
gatekeeper is
process
very
first.
tricky, because when you're talking about, you know, almost 30,000 people, and currently they're all allowed to utilize or create a team, trying to create a gatekeeper process is going to be hellacious.
No, definitely, but that's the core, and that what we often find with some of our customers as well is they pick a tool first because it has the most bells and whistles. In actuality, they need to think through the process, and they may, you know, under evaluate that portion of it, and they end up right back in the same boat.